Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining me with this video today. My name is Maureen De Silva, my pronouns are she and her, and I'm an art educator here at the AGO. In this video, I thought we could try activating a multisensory experience with the work of artist Mary Rinch. The AGO currently has an exhibition on of her watercolors on ivory called Mary Rinch, Painted from Life, from September 26th to March 28th, 2021. So I thought it might be fun to highlight some of her work. We actually will be enjoying an oil on canvas of hers that's not in the show, but hopefully you'll be inspired to take in more after this video. So I'm just gonna switch now to a share screen. Hello again from the AGO. Here is our lovely building, which I am currently not in, but for reference to anybody who's never been to the AGO, this is the Dundas West facade that you would encounter if you were walking along east along Dundas at the corner of McCall, and you get to see the really beautiful Galleria Italia wood and glass structure designed by Frank Gehry. That's sort of a signature hallmark of our architecture. So even though we are not in the building and we're doing this virtually, we still would like to offer a land acknowledgement. And so here we go. The Art Gallery of Ontario operates on land that is the territory of the Anishinaabe Mississauga Nation and was also the territory of the Wendat and Haudenosaunee. The Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Toronto is also governed by a treaty between the federal government of Canada and the Mississaugas of the Credit Anishinaabe Nation. Toronto has always been a trading center for First Nations. Okay. So I love to connect a work that we explore to the land acknowledgement. So I chose a landscape of Rinch's that really illustrates her artistic power and reflects the scene that most of us living in what we currently call Canada might be familiar with. And I'm going to get to this particular scene in just a bit. Mary Rinch was born in 1877 and lived until 1969 and was based in Toronto, where I'm also delivering the video. So this was like a little nice moment of connection to the land acknowledgement, acknowledging where the AGO is situated and also looking at a landscape by an artist who was Toronto based. You will hear some creative and interpretive audio description, some exploratory questions, and we'll try to activate this painting with a little bit of sound. I will also give you some context for the artist herself, who was quite prolific in her time, but is perhaps today lesser known than some of her contemporaries like the Group of Seven. So we're going to see if we can help fix that a bit with this video. So I'm going to disappear now from the corner. So I will now begin with a description. This work is called After a Snowfall, which is probably already particularly evocative for you in the title, and was painted in 1920. It is an oil on canvas, and though it is a landscape, the image is positioned in portrait orientation. It's roughly 35 inches tall and 34 inches wide. So if you need a sort of physical reference, if you struggle to visualize sizes, because you might notice in the corner here that we have the size in centimeters instead. I use my body as a reference. I'm 5'2", and the height of this painting would extend from my toes to my navel, and the length of it runs about 1.5 arms length. So good sized painting, but not so overwhelming that you would be more likely to find it in a gallery that could house it versus say in someone's home. So it makes this a really accessible painting for the average art lover. Okay, so we'll start with the upper left corner of this piece. In the very background, sitting in that upper left and extending to just past the center, there is a wide red house with a dark gray roof covered in snow in the furthest distance of this painting. Now, that structure is a bit ambiguous to me, I will admit. So while I said house, it could actually be a church or a hall of some sort. That is a structure. There's a doorway with a triangular top that's also painted a dark gray. And next to it, going over to the right side of the painting, but on the same line, is another red building slash house. And these structures take up the first quarter, the top quarter of the painting. In front of the houses are a scattering of trees in various groups that both go across the painting as well as form a diagonal from the lower left to the upper right. Their trunks are tall but slim, painted brown with scatterings of green leaves, which appear cloud-like on just some of the branches, suggesting an evergreen, likely a jack pine, though some of the trees shown throughout the painting have leafless branches. The trees are firmly placed on the snow-covered ground, which takes up 3/4 of the painting from the position of the houses downwards. The trees themselves span across the length of the painting, but not in such a crowded way that the houses disappear or that we lose the snow for them, and we also experience their height as Rynch places some of them in the middle and foreground. Behind and around the series of trees in the center of the painting, there appears to be dark green bushes. There is a tree in the immediate foreground which starts emerging just from its branches in the lower left corner, spanning upwards and towards the center. And these branches are largely bare and covered in snow. Behind this scene appears to be another, hosting red leaves, connecting it visually to the aforementioned red building structures. The reds of this painting are on the warmer side of the color spectrum, evoking both the color of fall leaves as they are just beginning to change, or that classic farmhouse red. The greens are deep and dark, reflecting the type of tree that stands up so well against the cold of winter. Now let's talk about the snow, which is rendered with such a careful detail to the capturing of sunlight across it. The snow is actually largely colored in a light blue, suggesting both the shadows cast by trees in the painting and trees that might exist off canvas. But the artist leaves snippets of white visible that act as highlights of sun in the snow, suggesting that this scene takes place perhaps in the early afternoon, and it's pretty bright afternoon. Some of the highlights suggest the terrain has some hills, and this is reinforced in the positioning of some of the trees, which create a diagonal starting from the lower left tree I described earlier. The painting has visible brushstrokes, and while not overly detailed, contains a realism in capturing light and texture. The style is impressionistic, with her study of light foregrounded in the work of her French predecessors. And the scene is serene and calm. It is an observation by the artist of that calm moment just after snowfall. So I've just described a snowy landscape, and I called it serene and I called it calm. But now I would like us to think about our own outdoor experiences with a landscape like that. In your memory, can you recall what a scene like this might sound like? What kind of soundscape would you expect? What do you think you might hear, and what would be the source? And because even though this scene is quiet, Rynch was known for painting or working from life. This means that she didn't work from photographs, and she did direct sketches with her subject in front of her. So I thought it might be interesting to consider how the sounds she might have heard in sketching this might impact the mood that she created visually. I often wonder what it would be like if there was maybe a screeching bird in the distance, if that would have contributed or changed the scene that she depicts and the mood that she is trying to get across. And I also want you to think about what sounds you might associate with words like calm and serene, and how calm and serene might actually change with the seasons. So I'm going to briefly share a winter soundscape. We might hear various moments of snowfall. As mentioned, this is very much after the snow has fallen, but we might hear the sounds as well of the snow landing on the tree and the ground. Okay, so just listen, think of the description, and see how it impacts mood and tone. And we'll start with this one. sounds did you hear there? Sounds of life, sounds of wind, things that maybe we can't see in the picture, but suggest a life outside of what the canvas offers. Let's try another one. This one is of falling snow. And we'll try maybe just one more, just something a little bit more active. See if there's a difference in your mood or your feelings as we transition between the different soundscapes. This one is a little bit more stormy weather. Take that down a bit, and thank you for taking the time to listen and to consider how sound might impact your interpretation of a visual piece. We'll return to a little bit of context about Mary Rynch. So one thing I wanted to actually talk about sound is also, we were really focusing on the sound that this painting might represent or be connected to it. But I also wanted you to think about the sound of actually looking at the painting. What kind of sounds would you hear when you're experiencing just the art itself? What might you expect to hear if you saw this painting at the AGO in a gallery space? Or perhaps if you encountered this in someone else's home instead. And one of the reasons I want us to think about this is to pose the question, have you ever thought of what it might sound like to look at art? And I put look in quotations, but I think often when we are in a gallery space, we take for granted the sounds that support our enjoyment of the art. So I want you to think about that, because certainly it's going to be a lot different even just doing this through the video. So let's circle back a little bit to who Mary Rynch is. And I want to give you some context to hopefully whet your appetite for more of her work. So she was born in the UK, and she eventually settled in Toronto and was very much a part of the art scene, joining many associations and organizations and really advocating for women artists in her time. She was a member of the Women's Art Association, founded in 1886, and which is still standing today in their location on Prince Arthur Avenue. She studied in Toronto at what is now OCADU, as well as in London and New York. As you will learn in the AGO's exhibition of her watercolors, she was able to sell her work for accessible prices to patrons and was therefore able to be independent in ways that it would have been difficult for women artists back then. If you look at her landscapes, you may find some affinity between her images and those coming from the members of the Group of Seven. Yet she doesn't enjoy today the same level of awareness that those artists do. It's interesting to note that this particular painting was completed in 1920, and that's the same year that the Group of Seven held their first ever exhibition. So this type of landscape was definitely of interest to many Canadian modernists. So it's really sort of interesting to think about who we know more in the mainstream versus who we don't. She eventually married George Agnew Reed, and who was also a well-respected Canadian painter and actually one of the founders of the AGO back when it was called something else. And they lived together in Witchwood Park, which is a hub for artistic community of Toronto in their time. And the area today still hosts artists through the organization Artscape. Both Reed and Rynch enjoyed sketching trips throughout Northern Ontario, and Rynch proved herself a multidisciplinary artist, working in oils, watercolors, and printmaking. Rynch was actually quite a master of linocut printmaking, meticulous in her registrations and laying down of color, and some of her prints are also in the AGO's collection. So I just wanted to say that I highly recommend spending some time with Mary Rynch's work to enjoy both her immense craftsmanship and connections to her subjects. There is not a wealth of scholarship right now around her work, so this exhibition at the AGO is a marvelous opportunity to contribute to the story of Mary Rynch and her art. I wish everybody a lovely winter, and I hope it's filled with art. Goodbye.